YuGiOh The Duelists of the Roses is one of those classics from Konami's quirky era, where the characters play anything but regular old duel monsters. An era of fun, creative and unique Yu-Gi-Oh video games that many of us old school fans would love to someday see Konami return to. Whether it's with new games or remasters of these old ones, because they harbour a lot of childhood nostalgia for long-time fans of the series like myself. And remind us of a time when the focus was more on the world of Yu-Gi-Oh and its characters, as opposed to simply milking money from Master Duel players by making every card of the hot new archetype an ultra rare again. The Duelists of the Roses is a great example of how wacky Yu-Gi-Oh used to be. You have Yugi and friends taking the place of real-world historical figures to reenact a piece of actual British history, the War of the Roses, with Yugi taking the place of Henry VII and Kaiba taking the place of the symbolic Christian Rosencreuz. But it gets weirder because this game is actually secretly a sequel to the PlayStation 1's Forbidden Memories, as Hai Shin returns as Richard III, and the final boss, whose name I can't pronounce, who looks like Nightmare, makes claims to be Nightmare's brother and is seeking vengeance for his defeat there. Aside from the strange plot choice, there's a few other key features of this game that made it so memorable to those of us who grew up with it. The first is the gameplay, simulating the war's battles through some sort of cross between normal Yu-Gi-Oh and chess, with 3D character models and attack animations for every monster, that made it all feel so much more real and epic. The second is the fact that you could choose who to side with, giving the player a very different story and progression through the game as a result. And I don't know about you, but this was the first time in a video game I got to choose to side with the quote-unquote bad guys if I wanted to, and I just thought that was so cool as a kid. The other thing that many people remember about this game is the starter decks, namely the fact that everyone who plays the game would be given different starter decks to choose from. And that's what we're going to be covering in today's video, because the game has a system to assign you 3 different starter decks to choose from during the prologue, and these 3 decks are chosen for you based on the name you input for your character. So you and all your friends may have all owned the same game, but all ended up playing it in a very different way. But let's be honest, we're Yu-Gi-Oh players. We didn't have friends, so all it meant for us was that this game had an insane amount of replayability. In total, there are 17 different starter decks for the game to choose from that it can offer you, each with their own strategies and playstyles, different potential fusions and boss monsters. Not all starter decks are born equal, however. Some have vastly more potential than others and can create significantly stronger monsters. So today, what I'll be doing is going over every single starter deck in the game, covering each of their strengths, weaknesses, what their win cons are, and the potential ways to upgrade the deck throughout the course of the game. Then I'll be ranking them in my personal opinion based on not only how strong they are, but also taking into account how fun they are to actually play with. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first deck on our list. We're starting off strong here with our first deck being Maiden of the Aqua. As you might have guessed, this is a water-type monster-focused deck, and its primary strategy is to flood the field, so that it can focus on using terrain bonuses to both overpower and outmaneuver your opponent. It does this by utilising the effects of a number of different monsters that transform the field into Umi spaces when flipped face up or destroyed. This alone is an insanely powerful strategy, as terrain advantage gives your monsters plus 500 to their points, and an extra space of movement. But against most opponents, you'll also be washing away any favourable terrain they might have had as well, which is especially useful against the likes of My Valentine, where 90% of the map is favourable to her. But it doesn't stop there because this deck is stacked. The boss monster of this deck is Aqua Dragon, which is by far one of the strongest fusions in the entire game, as its effect states that anywhere that it battles will become an Umi space, meaning you'll always have that field advantage to support him. And you can fuse him by combining a level 5 or higher Aqua-type monster with any dragon of 2000 plus attack, or a Sea Serpent of 1600 plus attack. And this starter deck provides you with both an Akihiron and a Karyushin to do this. But you can also fuse an extra Karyushin, if you need to, by combining a fish type and a dragon type, something this deck also provides you with multiple of. As if that wasn't insane enough already, the deck comes loaded with a few other high attack beatsticks, namely Man-Eating Black Shark at 2100 base attack, and Giant Red Sea Snake at 1800 attack. Then also has the audacity to provide you with the Aqua Chorus spell card to buff all your water monsters by 600, as well as having Starboy for another 300 buff while he's on field. You also get an equip in the form of Power of Kaishin for another 500 attack buff, and a great battle trap in Tears of the Mermaid, which can spellbind and weaken your opponents by 600 points. All in all, this deck is ridiculously powerful out of the gate, and it's easily S tier in my books. It's one of my personal favourite decks to play, as you not only have a ton of potential for creating multiple powerful boss monsters, but its hyper-aggressive playstyle, allowing you to rush down the enemy deck leader, makes it super fun to play as well. I think it speaks for itself that I managed to beat both campaign sides without ever upgrading the deck within just 7 hours on my livestream, and it's not as if I was trying to speedrun it or anything. If you do wish to upgrade this deck to make it more consistent, Mako Tsunami on Kaiba's campaign will be able to provide you with even more buffs and some other materials for fusing Aqua Dragon with. Also, when you get the chance, it's ideal to promote another unit to deck leader and move Maiden into the main deck as well, as she can provide you with yet another 500 buff to Aqua monsters while she's on field. Our next deck is the furry's favourite, Wolf Axwielder, and to say this is a downgrade from our last one would be an understatement. This deck is an identity crisis in trading card form, with no clear strategy and a variety of mediocre at best monsters without a whole lot of effects for any kind of strategy. I believe what it was going for was versatility, providing you with a wide range of monster types so that you could fuse into different boss monsters based on the terrain you're facing. A couple of examples being you can mix Faithbird with a warrior from the deck to make Punished Eagle for mountain terrain, or a weak plant with a fiend to make Rose Spectre of Dun for forests, or even a rock with a female monster for Mystical Sand for wasteland terrain. But unfortunately it spreads itself far too thin, meaning every duel you'll be digging through your deck to make one decent fusion, only for it to not be strong enough anyway because the deck has no support for that type. In fact, the absolute maximum of this starter deck's potential is one singular monster with 3000 attack points, and this is a specific fusion between Mystic Horseman and Battle Ox to create Rabid Horseman, then equipping him with the deck's one single equip card and also using the Sogen field spell to give him terrain bonus. But despite all of that work, it will still die to the average My Valentine trash mob. A genuine strategy with this deck is to play the Hinatama spell you get, and then hide in a corner and hope the enemy lock up, then wait 99 turns to win because you had 50 more life points than your opponent when you run out of turns. It has an interesting idea, but this deck needs a lot of work, whether you pivot the deck into focusing more on Beast Warriors, making use of the Sogen field spell you start with and adding more Axe of Despairs from Joey, or keep its versatility by adding some more buffs for different monster types. Either way, you'll need to do a lot of grinding against various opponents to make this deck somewhat strong and consistent. Overall, I'd rank this deck at D tier, because despite its poor execution, at the very least I think it's fun to have to be tactical and know your fusions in order to adapt to the terrain. And you also have quite a lot of freedom in how you wish to upgrade the deck as you progress through the game. The third deck on our list is the Illusory Gentleman, and this is probably one of the more tactical of all the starter decks, because it doesn't feature many strong monsters, however it does utilise a lot of strategic effect monsters you can use to your advantage. For example, you can use Mech Mole Zombie to turn an enemy monster into a zombie type when it is flipped face up. Then use Rogue Doll's effect to destroy that monster regardless of its attack points, because it instantly destroys any zombies it fights. Or use Amoeba to remove some terrain that's favourable to your opponent. You could even use Karibo or Unhappy Maiden to scout out the enemy cards as they take no battle damage when battling. As you can see, this deck provides you with plenty of tools with which to outsmart your opponent with. However, because the deck provides you with a plant and multiple zombie-type monsters, the main strategy you'll likely want to be employing is fusing Pumpkin King of Ghosts, a 1800 attack and 2000 defense monster who can be fused by combining a plant-type monster with any zombie-type monster with 1000 plus attack. If a zombie is below 1000 attack, it will simply fuse into Wood Remains, which will require another plant to reach Pumpkin. To avoid this, fusing a low attack zombie with something like a dragon or a warrior type monster that the deck provides first will help you avoid wasting one of your plants. Its stats may not look impressive, but the reason this card is so strong is because for every turn it is face up on the field, it will boost itself and any other zombies on the field by 100 attack points. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it starts to add up pretty quickly and eventually it will be able to bulldoze any monster it encounters. Unfortunately, this does mean that this deck's game plan typically boils down to making Pumpkin, then using the strategic effects of its other monsters in order to store your opponent for as long as possible. Although, if you don't want to wait around, you could also make use of the Yami field spell and the 2 equip spells the deck gives you in order to buff a couple of your spellcasters into decently sized beatsticks. The best choice being Dark Elf, who can take the Black Pendant equip spell to become a 3000 attack monster on our Yami field buff. To make her, you just need to combine your Ancient Elf with a non-female Dark spellcaster. Using a female here sometimes results in Dark Witch, which is a fairy, so that doesn't help us here. All in all, this deck is okay. It has a lot of cool ideas in theory, however most duels end up feeling pretty bland, as you just make Pump King and sit around for 30 turns till it becomes overpowered. There's never really much need for the strategic aspects, but they do come in handy every so often. I'd put this deck in D tier, because it does have probably the strongest boss monster in the game accessible, but sadly that boss monster is a boring strategy, and the deck doesn't have much else going for it outside of that and stalling. There are a couple of ways you can upgrade this deck however, as you could lean into the Pump King strategy more heavily by farming bones, or you can grind Solomon for better spellcaster support. Moving on to our fourth deck, we have Cyrus's waifu, Thunder Nyan. This is another deck similar to Wolf Axwielder in that it has quite a wide range of monster types and options for fusions. But unlike the Wolfman, this deck has a much stronger and much more obvious boss monster. If you're a fan of a bit of memories, you'll be glad to know that the main strategy of the Thunder deck is of course to focus on fusing the classic twin-headed Thunder Dragon, and buffing him up to a massive 3800 attack monster using the 2 equip spells the deck provides you with, and making sure he gets his field buff as well thanks to the mountain field spell you're given to buff him even further to 4300. The only caveat to this is the fact you can't simply fuse a Thunder Dragon with another Thunder to make him anymore. So you'll need a dragon of at least 2000 attack before combining that with a Thunder type to make him. And unfortunately the only dragon they provide you with in the start is a single baby dragon. But you can combine this with a rock type in order to get Stone D, who fits the requirements. If all else fails, because of the zombie and plant types this deck provides you with, you can also always fall back on Pump King again if necessary. Outside of that, there's not really much else to this deck. You have a couple of different win conditions and a few versatile fusion options to support them. You can also fuse the numerous Thunder types with spellcasters in order to make multiple copies of Immortal of Thunder, which can then be fused with another spellcaster to make Kaminari attack, which is a decent 1900 attack beat stick that would also be buffed on your mountain terrain. In the beginning, this deck is very slow to get going, but by adding just a few more dragons where possible, it has some crazy potential by letting you fuse multiple copies of Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon. The best ones to go for would be any dragons you can find with 1600 or more attack, as these can easily fuse with your plant types to make the 2100 attack Bee Dragon Jungle King. But the most optimal choice would be to grind Mai to get her Harpy's Pet Dragon, as this is 2000 attack by base, so you can quickly fuse this with any Thunder to get into Twin-Headed. I personally think this deck goes in the B tier, as it requires a little work to make it more consistent, and until then, losing that single Twin-Headed you can make to some kind of trap or debuff is essentially a game ender. However, its top end out of the box is still one of the strongest of all the starter decks, plus bonus points for that sweet nostalgia. Next up is the plant type focused Fairy King Truesdale deck. This deck is very similarly built to the Maiden of the Aqua deck from earlier, in that it feels very streamlined in its chosen types, and focuses on being quite aggressive by buffing up multiple monsters. But it's lacking the ability to manipulate the field to your advantage as much, outside of having the Forest Field spell at its disposal. And there aren't really many options for fusions with this deck, so you don't have a particularly strong standalone boss monster to fuse into like Aqua Dragon or Pump King. But you're given a plethora of solid beat sticks to run with to compensate for this. The most notable being Quagar Hercules at 1900 attack, and Rose Spectre of Dun at 2000 attack, and both of these each have an equip to buff them, these being Insect Armor and Vile Germs respectively. But Rose Spectre will be your main boss monster and strategy here, as it can also benefit from your other spell Reign of Mercy, which gives all plant monsters a 600 attack buff which can be insanely powerful, making it a 3600 attack monster in total when on forest terrain. The lack of fusing required and its straightforward strategy make this a very easy deck to pick up and start crushing opponents with. Plus, it gives you the Acid Trap Hole card, which is a very quick and easy way to deal with any of your opponent's boss monsters. Its only downfall is not providing you with any Fiend types whatsoever, so there's no possibility of you fusing extra Rose Spectres. And farming Panic to add those Fiends to fuse with weaker plants is probably the most efficient way to upgrade this deck, so you can have multiple sexy plant ladies. You should also move the deck leader into the main deck as soon as possible, because Fairy King's effect gives all plant monsters a further 500 attack buff while it is face up on the field. This deck is only slightly weaker than Maiden of the Aqua, on account of the fact that it doesn't have quite as big of a boss monster, and it can't turn the field in its advantage as efficiently. Plus, the strategy of searching your deck for one or two monsters and hyper buffing them can quickly start to feel stale after a while. So the A tier feels most appropriate for this deck. Command Knight, who goes by Tactical Warrior in this game for some reason, is our 6th starter deck to cover. And despite the name, this deck isn't all that complicated or strategic. Its main focus is to summon one of a number of the strong beatstick warrior types the deck provides you with, and use the one equip and Sogun field spell to help you overpower your enemies. Your best monster here is the Judgeman fusion, which can be made by combining the Judgment hand with any warrior with more than 1000 attack points. But as your boss monster, it's a bit lackluster as it only has 2200 attack, which is only 100 more points than the Empress Judge you also get accessible from the main deck, so either of these are the best targets for the equip, to give you a 3200 or 3100 attack monster on Sogun terrain respectively. This should be enough to beat over your opponents in most scenarios, but it isn't exactly confidence inspiring. Especially because if your one equip monster dies, you don't have any other buffed warriors to follow it up with. Thankfully this deck does have both plants and zombies, so again you can fall back on Pumpkin, King of Ghosts if things go wrong. It's not a terrible deck by any means, it's just very basic and it struggles from the fact 90% of it is worthless, so you'll be throwing it away looking for the 5 or 6 cards you actually want to use. But at least it's relatively easy to upgrade, by getting some more warrior focused equips from Joey and moving the deck leader into the main deck for its effect of buffing warriors by 300 points when it's flipped face up. But even still, the deck feels a little bland to me personally, so I think it belongs in the C tier, because it is okay at best. The light attribute themed Luminous Soldier deck is up next, and I believe this is supposed to be another warrior focused deck. However, you can disregard most of the cards here, because all you need to care about is the fact that you get Kaiser Dragon at 2300 attack in the base deck, which is already pretty crazy and capable on its own. However, you're also given a couple of Thunder types to fuse with it, meaning Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon is accessible. Although, compared to the Thunder Nyan deck, you only get one equip spell that works on it here, and also no proper field spell, but it is still a 3300 attack monster, which is nothing to snuff at. You do get a second equip spell in the deck, but it's for warrior types, and there aren't a whole lot of great choices for it here. And interestingly, you also get the Burning Land spell instead of a Mountain or Umi, which is essentially a field spell but for normal type terrain, which doesn't buff anybody. The rest of the deck, however, is just a giant nothing burger. There's your typical standard fusions of things like Mystical Sand by fusing a rock and a female, however generally your strategy will be to focus on getting to twin-headed as fast as possible, or just buffing Kaiser Dragon with the equip instead if it's good enough for the opponent you're facing. It has one combo, and that combo is basically just the same as the Thunder Nyan decks, but worse. So I believe it belongs in the C tier with the other mediocre decks, because it's capable, but there are just other decks that do what it's trying to do but better. And most of the time I was using this deck, I was just wishing I was using the Thunder Nyan again. If you're looking to upgrade the deck, you could focus on the warriors by grinding Joey, but you're better off grinding Mai for her Harpy Dragons and Shadi for his Thunder types in order to give you other options into Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon. We're approaching the halfway point here with our 8th deck, Patrician of Darkness, and let's just say there's definitely a reason this one is the go-to for speedrunners. The deck focuses on dark attribute monsters, with a large amount of zombie types in particular, and you can probably already guess where this is going, because yep, the old faithful Pump King is back and better than ever. Aside from the fact that you have 2 plant types, meaning you can easily make 2 copies of him, what makes Pump King especially strong in this deck is that he isn't being made here just to slowly buff himself. You have a plethora of other zombies, and you can turn any of these into a strong boss monster if you wait a few turns. However, the best target and arguably the real boss monster of this deck is Great Mammoth of Goldfine at 2200 attack. And as if this deck wasn't strong enough already, they not only give you one of these to start with, but they also give you a copy of Mammoth Graveyard as well, so that you can fuse a second Goldfine by combining it with any of your other zombies. So your main strategy will be to create an army of the undead who get stronger every turn thanks to Pump King, and then Zerg rush your opponent with 3 to 5 giant beatsticks. But wait, it doesn't stop there, because you also get a ton of support cards to make an already insane deck even stronger and more versatile. Grandpa Solomon hiding behind his Fortress Labyrinth spaces? Oops, this deck has Shadow Ghoul, who can walk right through it. Need to relocate your deck leader out of danger? Or simply want to rush down the enemy deck leader and summon monsters on top of them to win within just a few turns? You get freaking Dimension Hole in the starting deck. Want to make Cyberstein a knockoff version of Aqua Dragon? If you use Blue-Eyed Silver Zombie, you can make any monster a zombie type, and therefore buffable by Pump King. And Cyberstein will then make any space he battles on Wasteland, which he will then get a bonus from. Has an enemy boss monster eaten too many equip spells? Or do you just need to unspellbind one of your own? You've got Cursebreaker for that. And if you, God forbid, somehow want even more attack points, you'll also get a Yami field spell and 2 equips, one for warriors and another for zombie types. This deck's potential just never seems to end. It's like they completely gave up on balancing this one. The deck gives you so many options for plays, it genuinely feels impossible to lose sometimes. To give you an idea of how strong this deck is, speedrunners will beat the entire game in under 1 hour with it. Yes, that's both Kaiba and Yugi's campaigns. It goes without saying that this deck belongs in the S tier, maybe even S+ if I could. It's so insanely overpowered, it turns the game into some kind of isekai power fantasy, like the Sword Art Online of children's card games. It really makes you wonder if Patrician of Darkness was one of the devs' favourite card or something. There's really no need to upgrade the deck at all, but by defeating Bones you can end up with some more strong zombies, like a copy of Pumpkin and some more equips if you really want. Back to some semblance of normalcy, we have the King Tiger Wanghu deck. Compared to our last deck, this one feels a little underwhelming, but it's overall not too bad. This is a beast type focused deck and is another one of those starter decks that doesn't really focus too much on fusions. Although there are a few decent monsters accessible, such as combining a Fiend with a Beast type of level 4 or more, will result in Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast at 2100 attack. And Flame Cerberus should be fusible by combining a Beast of at least 1200 attack points with a Pyro, but for some reason, the Pyro they give you in the starter deck just doesn't work for fusing for whatever reason. But regardless, your main focus won't be on the fusions anyway, as in this deck the strongest monster at your disposal is actually already in the main deck and it's Firewing Pegasus at 2250 attack points. So the strategy of this deck will pretty much just rely on finding this card and utilising the 2 beast type equips and forest field spell to make him into a 3750 attack boss monster. You do thankfully have a couple of the tools at your disposal, such as a single plant and zombie, meaning Pumpkin is there if necessary, although he is going to be a little inconsistent to find with so few materials, so best not to rely on him too much. You also do get Goblin's Secret Remedy to heal yourself for 1000 life points, and a Sparks to deal 50 damage to your opponent, so turtling in a corner for 99 turns isn't ever off the table either. Fissure can help you destroy an enemy monster for free, but you have to be careful as it targets the lowest attack monster on the field, which means it can target your own cards as well. And Block Attack isn't the greatest trap card, but it can prevent one move from your opponent where needed. Overall, I'm inclined to put this deck in B rank, but towards the top end. Because the deck is very middle of the board, it has 1 or 2 potential strong monsters, but the rest aren't going to be doing a whole lot. And even the utility cards are very mediocre as well. They're nice to have, but they all seem to come with their drawbacks or limitations, and there are better alternatives out there in other decks. It reminds me a lot of the Tactical Warrior starter deck, except this deck at least has a slightly higher top end for its boss monster. The other main drawback to this deck is upgrading it will be difficult, as no opponent primarily uses beast types, so your best bet would be to farm Bakura if anybody for some extra Beast Fang equip spells, or hoping to get another copy of Firewing Pegasus from the reincarnation mechanic. The next deck is the reptile and dinosaur-centric Serpentine Princess, and despite featuring 2 of the worst monster types in the game, with a distinct lack of fusion capabilities, this deck actually handles them quite well, by compensating you with a number of decently strong monsters from the get-go, and also giving you a ton of support for the types, including a Wasteland field spell for the dinosaurs, 2 equips, and Sabek's Blessing, which is a field-wide buff of 600 attack for reptiles as well. And as we've seen in other decks, these types of spells are usually pretty powerful. Early game, your main boss monster here is going to be one of the few fusions reptiles and dinosaurs are actually capable of, Brachioradius, a 2200 attack monster who can be made by combining a dinosaur with 1750 plus attack with an aqua type, or a reptile with 1400 plus attack and a rock type. And because this is a water attribute dinosaur, it can take both equips to become a 3700 attacker on our wasteland terrain. Unfortunately, this won't benefit from our Sabek's Blessing spell. However, you also get a strong reptile in the form of Emperor of Land and Sea at 1800 attack, who can also take both equips. And after Sabek's Blessing as well, he'll become a 3400 attack monster. That is, until you're able to promote another unit into deck leader, as Serpentine Princess has the effect to buff all reptiles by a massive 900 attack points when flipped face up, turning Emperor into a massive 4300 beast, so he'll likely become your main boss monster instead as soon as the option to move Princess into the main deck becomes available. But despite all of this, the deck's strategy does not rely on power alone in order to succeed, as its real strength lies in what I've dubbed the Medusa strategy, leaving enemy monsters eternally spellbound, which feels on brand for a deck based around a Snake Lady. The most obvious piece of this strategy is the Paralyzing Potion equip spell, which you can bait enemies into attacking, and so long as they aren't a machine type, they'll be eternally spellbound for doing so. But you can also use Ancient Jar's effect to make any spellbinding permanent, so long as it is in face-up defense position on the field. So combine this with Phantom Duan, who spellbinds for 3 turns normally when flipped face up, or by using the oft-forgotten attribute counter mechanic to spellbind an enemy for 1 turn, you can permanently stun any monster your opponent throws at you. I think I have to put this deck in S tier, as it is a very fun and creatively themed deck, which was a lot more powerful than I'd anticipated going into it, seeing reptiles and dinosaurs were its focus. It has a really good blend of attack power and strategy, while never feeling too ridiculously overpowered. In my opinion, this is what the Illusory Gentleman deck should have been, as it has a lot of strategic potential in the same way that deck did. However, here it can be utilised for more than just stalling for Pump King. Even though Pump King is still accessible here as well should you need it, although most of the time he is a nice bonus more than anything. But with this deck you could theoretically spellbind all of your opponent's monsters and leave them unable to summon anything, so you can swing at them freely with even low attack monsters. There's a few ways to upgrade this deck should you wish to try it for yourself. The first being to get Serpentine Princess into the main deck ASAP as mentioned earlier, due to her effect being so insanely powerful. The other is by grinding Rex Raptor at the start of Yugi's campaign, as he has multiple dinosaurs and reptiles as well as copies of the Raise Body Heat equip spell, which works for both types. You can also try to acquire an Umi field spell from Mako if you wanted to get really strategic, as the deck comes with Flame Ghost, who destroys all monsters in Umi terrain when flipped face up. So you could try flooding the field around a bunch of the enemy monsters before flipping Flame Ghost, essentially creating a tactical nuke out of a 2-card combo. Just be careful not to accidentally blow up all of your own monsters instead. Deck number 11 is Airknight Parshath, appropriately focused around fairies and warrior type monsters. And looking down the list, this deck is very simplistic and straightforward. Not too many different types and hardly any effect monsters to speak of. You do have a few fusions to help with the versatility of the deck, with the primary ones being to combine your Marvelous with another of your winged beasts for a 2300 attack Crimson Sunbird. Or by combining a winged beast with a warrior, you'd get Punished Eagle at 2100 attack instead. Or you can combine a fairy type with any of your female monsters to make Dark Witch at 1800 attack, all of which will benefit from your Mountain Field spell. But the simplest option for a boss monster in this deck would be Orion the Battle King, a 1800 attack light fairy monster, of which you're given 2 copies of in the initial deck. This is because the deck strategy primarily revolves around its numerous equips and buffs to make either one gigantic boss monster or 2 to 3 decently sized beatsticks. You're given a Mountain Field spell, which is always nice to see, as well as Winged Trumpeter, which buffs all fairies on the field by 600 points, which again is always very strong for making multiple boss monsters. Then you're also given 2 equip spells, one for light attributes and one for fairy types, and on top of that you also have Hoshingen, who buffs all light monsters by a further 300 points when flipped. So in total, a light attribute fairy type with all of these buffs present would gain a total of 2400 bonus attack points. So for Orion the Battle King, that would make him a 4200 attack monster. Outside of that, and a pretty solid battle trap in Tears of the Mermaid, this deck doesn't really have much else going for it. You'll notice this deck feels very similarly built to the Fairy King Truesdale deck from earlier, but for some reason this one just doesn't feel as fun or interesting to me personally. But I believe this deck still also deserves a spot in the A tier, because it is very powerful and also very easy to pick up as a newer player of the game. It's also very easily upgradable even further by dueling Taya at the start of Kaiba's campaign for more fairies and equips. She also drops Dancing Elf and Winged Egg Elf, who can be combined with a fairy or light spellcaster in order to make Mystical Elf, which grants all your light monsters an 800 point buff when flipped, making the deck significantly stronger very quickly and easily. Although in its base form, playing this deck can feel a little bland at times, as its strategy is very basic and quite repetitive. Our next deck is the Winged Beast type focused Birdface deck. And I promise I'm not just biased here because the deck has harpies in it, it genuinely is a really powerful deck with a fun and unique strategy. As you might expect, in this deck you get a large number of dragons and winged beasts, as well as a few random other types for your typical fusions like warriors and pyros to go with your birds to combine to make Punished Eagle or Crimson Sunbird respectively. Or you could even combine your Harpy Lady with the dragon to make Harpy's Pet Dragon, which has 2000 attack and 2500 defense, which is already pretty strong, but it gets much stronger later in the game after you've acquired more Harpy Ladies and an Elegant Egotist, so you can fuse Harpy Lady Sisters, as these two cards both power up the Harpy's Dragon when flipped face up, by 300 for Lady or 900 for Sisters. Some of the other cards you get are also pretty strong right out of the gate, like Parrot Dragon and Monstrous Bird, both at 2000 attack points. However, the real strength in this deck lies where Yu-Gi-Oh players would least expect it: reading. Because the strategy that makes this deck so strong is actually centered around Spirit of the Books. This 1400 attack monster may appear unassuming, but its effect allows you to summon a Buku when they're flipped face up. Now, Buku strengthens Spirit of the Books by 700 attack when flipped up themselves, already making them a 2100 attack monster without any other card's influence, which is already pretty decent, especially considering all of the buffs the deck provides you with, being a Mountain Field spell, Windstorm of Aqua for a field-wide 600 buff to winged beasts, plus 2 equips, one for winged monsters and another for winged beasts, means that this would already be a 4200 attack monster. However, Buku has a neat trick when combined with a winged beast by turning into another copy of Spirit of the Books, meaning you can keep cycling and buffing all existing Spirit of the Books on the field for as long as you have more winged beasts to fuse with, to create an army of birds with an insanely high potential for attack power. Just be careful about how many monsters you have on field, as Buku will not be summoned if you already have 5 monsters after summoning Spirit of the Books, ending the cycle. This deck already belongs in the top end of A tier, because it's not only powerful, it's also a really silly and fun strategy to pull off. But by defeating Mai, you can acquire more winged beasts to cycle this strategy even further. Or, you can acquire her Harpy's cards in order to give yourself another strategy in massively buffing Harpy's Pet Dragon instead if you would prefer. Its main weakness is that it can take quite a bit of setup, especially if Spirit of the Books is far down in the deck, so it can be rather slow to get going at times. Our 13th deck is appropriately the infamous Kryuel, notoriously the worst starter deck in the entire game. But just how bad is it exactly? The deck focuses on Fiend-type monsters, however these don't typically have many good fusions, outside of Soul Hunter, who can be fused by combining Crest Clown or Clown Zombie with a Reptile, none of which are present in this deck. The other good fusion Fiends have is Summon Skull, which requires any Fiends to fuse with Job Change Mirror, which is also not present in the deck, so they clearly don't expect you to be performing many fusions with the starter deck. Thankfully, they do compensate for this by providing you with quite a number of strong Fiend types in the main deck, such as King of Yamimakai at 2000 attack, Ushi Oni at 2150 attack, and 2 copies of Air Eater at 2100 attack as well. However, the only support they provide you with is a single equip spell, meaning the strongest monster this deck is capable of is 2650 attack points, which isn't going to be strong enough in a lot of scenarios. But don't worry, the deck provides you with Cyber Commander to buff all those machine monsters you don't have by 300 points, and also a Call of the Haunted spell to turn all your monsters into zombies, while also not having access into Pumpkin King of Ghosts or any support for zombie types at all for that matter to make use of whatsoever. The deck just doesn't make sense. It's like they had a few different ideas for strategies but didn't commit to any of them. So now, for the deck to be of any value at all, you have to grind various opponents and make it actually functional yourself. But on the bright side, at least the deck gives you some minuscule amount of effect damage in Sparks and Hinatama, so your main strategy here is genuinely to use these to get ahead in life points, then just wait in the corner for 99 turns and win. This deck is definitely F tier, it just stinks. It does nothing well, and I have genuinely no idea how I ever managed to beat Kaiba's campaign with it. It needs a lot of work, but thankfully because it could never decide on a strategy, you have a few ways you can go about upgrading it. I think the most interesting idea is to use Free Duel to farm extra copies of Kryuel, and use it in the main deck to make use of its effect to increase all damage by 200 points, and focusing on an effect damage deck of which Solomon and Pegasus have quite a few spells and traps for. Or if you farm Bones for materials to fuse Pumpkin, you can make use of the Call of the Haunted spell to turn your already powerful monsters into zombies and continuously buff them. Or by simply farming Panic, you can get some more strong Fiends and Fiend support like a Yami Field spell to focus more on your Fiend types. But yeah, the base deck is terrible and just simply not fun to play. Quite the contrast to our previous deck here, we have Injection Fairy Lily, another light attribute focused deck, but this time more centered around females and spellcaster types, and you have quite a few options with this deck. Most of the cards here look quite low power outside of Emperor's Judge with 2100 attack. So one option you can go for is to just use her and buff her up with the 3 female type equip spells you're provided with to turn her into a solid 3600 attack beat stick. And you can also use your 2 copies of Queen's Doubles effects to power up your 2 copies of Princess of Tsurugi to increase them up by 700 points each to create a couple of 2300 attackers to support her. However, this deck's real strength lies in its fusions. You already have 1 copy of Mystical Elf in the deck, a 2000 defense monster with the effect to buff up all your light monsters by 800 points. And this alone is a great buff to any of the numerous light monsters you have, but you have the materials to make a couple extra copies of her as well. By combining the dancing elves you are given with either a fairy or a light spellcaster, you can create 2 more copies, totaling a 2400 point buff to all your light monsters. Which by that point, even Mystical Elf, whose normal attack is 800, can become a boss monster of 3200 attack, and that's before any of the equip cards are added on. So there's not really a dedicated boss monster to this deck, which is what makes it so powerful, as you can kind of just buff whatever is on field at the time, assuming they're of light attribute. But the strongest option would likely be Dark Witch, who is a light fairy type of 1800 attack you can easily fuse in this deck by combining a fairy and a female. You also get some great support with the deck including a Harpy's Feather Duster to clear the path of any traps your opponent might have, and a Curse Breaker to remove any quips from an enemy or unspellbind one of your own monsters. This deck can be insanely powerful, although similarly to the Birdface deck, it can be rather slow to get the ball rolling at times, which can be a weakness especially against highly aggressive enemies. But I think it is also a high A tier for me personally, because again, similar to Birdface, I find the strategy of 3 to 5 of the same monster circle jerking buffs to each other very entertaining. It is also extremely easy to upgrade and make more consistent, as Taya right at the start of Kaiba's campaign has more dancing elves and winged egg elves for you to be capable of using more mystical elves. Plus, a couple duels later will provide you with more female-centric equips you can use to scale even higher. Down to the final 3 decks now as we move on to the twin-headed behemoth deck, and this one is surprisingly underwhelming compared to what you'd expect from a dragon-themed deck. It has a lot of versatility for fusions due to its large number of different types of monsters. You get Kaiser Dragon at 2300 attack, who is pretty remarkable on its own, but this means it is also strong enough to go into Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon with the 1 Thunder you're provided with. Crawling Dragon and Sky Dragon being 1600 and 1900 attack respectively, also means they're strong enough to go into B-Dragon Jungle King by combining with a plant, or Cursed Dragon by combining with a zombie. And of course, those 2 types existing in the deck does also mean that Pumpkin King of Ghosts is available once again to fall back on if you want it. Aside from that, the deck is rather unremarkable. It suffers from the same issue a few other decks do, where it seems to spread itself too thinly among too many different types, without much support for any of them. You do get a couple great effect monsters for strategic plays in Flame Ghost to nuke Umi terrain, and Wall of Illusion who sends an enemy monster back to the deck. Great for getting rid of a boss monster with too many equips. But yeah, your main goal and strategy with this deck will most likely be Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, as you also have the Mountain Field spell to help buff it up to a decent 3300 attack. Unfortunately, the equip spell we're given in this deck, Dragon Treasure, doesn't work on Twin-Headed, so the best target for that would be B-Dragon Jungle King, who with the equip and field spell reaches 3100 attack as well. Both of these should be enough in most scenarios, but they do have to be careful of traps and enemy boss monsters with a couple of buffs, as they can easily be beaten leaving you without any more plays. This deck isn't terrible, just disappointing, and needs quite a bit of work, so I believe the C tier suits it best. The fact it's so middle of the board means there's not really one correct way to power up this deck's potential. You really can go quite a few different ways with it. But with so many dragons already, one idea could be to pursue farming Mako Tsunami and adding some fish types to fuse with them to form Kyryu Shin, and then some level 5 or higher Aquas to form Aqua Dragon from that, as this can take your Dragon Treasure equip to become 2750 attack points. And also due to its effect, it will leave spaces of Umi terrain wherever it battles, which you can combo with your Flame Ghost to snipe an enemy monster that wanders into them accidentally. Following on from one behemoth is another, this time it's Molten Behemoth, the Pyro and Rock type focused deck. This is a very interesting deck with quite a lot of versatility if you know your fusions, because again this is one of those decks that has a wide range of different types, although it does also have a few solid standalone beat sticks as well, including a Flame Cerberus who can be one of your options for the main focus of the deck, being a 2100 attack monster capable of taking all 3 of our equips here to become a 3600 attack monster. You also get Millennium Golem, a 2000 attack and 2200 defense rock type who'll benefit from our wasteland terrain, and our Spring of Rebirth equip to become either a decent attacker or defender at 3000 attack, 3200 defense. But your fusions are where the deck can shine the most, as you have a couple of dragons to combine with your rock types to form Stone D, who also benefits from Wasteland and the same equip to become another 3000 attacker or 3300 defender. But this is also capable of fusing with one of your Thunders to become Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon if desired, as this can also take Spring of Rebirth equip to become 3300 attack even without mountain or Umi terrain accessible. The two Marvelouses in the deck can also combine with each other or another Pyro in order to form Crimson Sunbird, a 2300 attack winged beast who can also take 2 out of 3 of our equips to become a 3300 attack. Or you have Warriors to combine with the Pyros instead, to combine to make Flame Swordsman, a 1800 attack warrior who could take our Salamandra equip to become 2300 attack, or 2600 against dinosaurs. Then there's also a few beast types in case you want to fuse some extra copies of Flame Cerberus as well, by combining them with a Pyro. So already we have multiple different decently strong monsters, each suitable for a different type of terrain. And if we had a female monster as well, we could even fuse Mystical Sand at 2100 attack by combining them with a rock type, who would also benefit from our Wasteland Field Spell and Spring of Rebirth equip to become 3100 attack. This deck has a lot of possibilities, and yet because all the fusions tend to revolve around Pyros and rocks, they are usually capable of benefiting from at least one of the buffs the deck provides to us. Therefore, I believe this deck belongs in the B tier, as it is a great all-arounder deck that is everything Wolf Axwielder wishes it could have been. It's highly versatile to match whatever terrain you're facing, but it doesn't compromise too much on attack power thanks to its multiple supporting equip cards. That being said, the top end is rarely anything too spectacular, typically floating around the 3500 attack range, which should be more than enough outside of the select few extreme circumstances like Mano Din. So the best way to upgrade the deck is to find the boss monster you like the most, and streamline the deck more around them. For example, Flame Cerberus would benefit from having a Forest Field spell in the deck, which you can acquire from Weevil, as well as increasing the number of beast types so you can fuse into him more easily. Or Crimson Sunbird similarly would do well to have a Mountain Field spell and some more winged beasts in the deck acquired through My Valentine. And if you'd like to keep the versatility between Pyro and Rock types, Ishtar, Mako and Shadi all have copies of the Spring of Rebirth equip spell which can be used for both. Another big upgrade would be moving Molten Behemoth into the main deck, as he can also buff Pyro types by another 500 points while flipped face up. The final starter deck for us to cover is Robotic Knight, the Bandit Keith inspired machine type deck. Machine types don't get too many strong fusions in this game. Your best bet is Metal Dragon at 1850 attack, by fusing a machine and a dragon type together, or Cybersaurus at 1800 attack by fusing a machine and a dinosaur together. So much like Bandit Keith himself, the fusion potential for machine types in this game is kinda pathetic. Thankfully the deck provides you with quite a few ways to support them. Your best bet with this deck is to focus on the higher attack machines the deck provides you with, being Royal Guard and Steel Ogre Grotto 2, both at 1900 attack and 2200 defense, and utilising the limiter removal spell to buff all machines on the field by 600 points, as well as Cyber Commander who gives an extra 300 point boost to all machines while he's face up on the field. Combine this with your Wasteland Field spell, and you have a couple of monsters with 3300 attack points. You do also get one equip spell in the deck, meaning one of those monsters can even be raised to 3800 attack points. You may have noticed that this deck feels very similarly built to decks like Fairy King Truesdale and Airknight Parshath, so that's why I feel like it deserves to be alongside them in the A tier, because it is more than capable of making 2 to 3 decently sized beat sticks to steamroll most of the campaign with. But outside of that, the deck doesn't really have much going for it, and can feel kinda bland, especially considering the lack of good fusion potential even after upgrading the deck. Speaking of which, upgrading this deck will be fairly straightforward, as Bandit Keith unsurprisingly will have all the components you need to optimise this deck, with plenty of equips and strong machines to acquire. And this is also another one of those decks where moving the deck leader into the main deck as soon as possible would also help improve it, as Robotic Knight provides a 300 point buff to all your machines while it's face up, similar to Cyber Commander. And that's all 17 starter decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelists of the Roses explained and ranked. Attempting to beat the game with every starter deck was quite the ordeal, but I hope you enjoyed this video that came as a result of it. Maybe it helped teach you a thing or two about the game, like a fusion of monsters you didn't know about before. Or perhaps it inspired you to try out a different starter deck you may have never even considered before. Either way, I hope this video was at least somewhat interesting, even if just for my opinions and where I'd rank each of them on a tier list. Speaking of which, I made the tier list publicly available on Tiermaker, so if you don't agree with me, I've left a link to it in the description so you can rank the decks yourself. And share them with me either on Twitter or in my Discord, or just simply post your thoughts and opinions in the comments here. What do you agree and disagree with? Did I miss anything about your favourite deck? Let me know. I've also left links there to each of the VODs where I tried out a different deck each livestream by playing through Kaiba's campaign. And lastly, if people like this video, maybe I'll do the same thing for Clovis's Redux 2 mod of the game. So let me know if that's something you'd want to see. But that about does it for this video. I hope to see you in the next one, or on one of my live streams here on YouTube where I stream almost every day from 8 PM UK time. But for now, bye bye!